Hello everyone, welcome back. I had a little bit of quiet time today, so I thought I would go ahead and record the first installment of our Nubs in India video series. I was trying to find a good way to catalog these sites and present them, and at first I was going to do it maybe geographically, top to bottom, but I think I would like to start with the most clear examples and some of the most impressive examples, I think, and then that will get us a good baseline of what we're going to be looking at and where to look, and then we'll get into some of the more obscure, smaller temples. And I thought today I would start with Google Earth imagery, because at Warangal, where we're going to start, there is really good ground level imagery. Some of these sites don't have any, so I think we should take advantage of it when we have it. And also, we don't have to rely as much on other people's photos that have watermarks in them, etc. So we'll go ahead and go down to Warangal. It's in a more northerly region than some of the other ones, although there's some outliers. And you can see Warangal Fort. It is a huge construction. It's like a tell from the Middle East, like the tell of Aleppo in Syria. It's very fortified, very big, very impressive. And I went ahead and tried to point out every single nub or nub trace or other oddity that I could find, so we can just go straight to them, make it a little bit faster. However, I've just done a quick look around the site, and I have a few extra photos we can look at also, so I might be missing some things. So definitely take the time, look around. You can zoom in, see what kind of evidence you can find. There's a lot of rubble piled up and stacked along the perimeter, so you might be able to find some other building elements with some evidence in them that I'd missed. Okay, so we're going to come right down to one of the perimeter gates. There are 4 of these. Can you spot the nub? Yep, right there at the base. It is, let's see, we can get a little bit closer so you can see it's kind of shallow, rounded, not very defined or refined. And there are others here that have this same profile. And I want to point out that the other 3 gates like this do not have nubs on them, at least not from the angles that we have available. So I'll go ahead and prove that to you now. So we're coming up to the side of one of the other gates here, and you see no nubs on this side. Come up closer, and no nubs on the interior surfaces. Now, I don't have any angles of the exterior sides, the opposite sides, to confirm that there are no nubs on the outsides of any of these, but for sure only one gate has them on the inside, and it is that one we saw earlier. This is interesting, a broken off area. I'm not sure if that's a nub trace. It could just be a cracked surface, but it is interesting. Maybe it's been filled. Maybe it used to be a hole. We have to think about repairs and restorations. There's a lot of that going on here. Over to the opposite side gate, we see again pristine surfaces. Maybe a broken off area there, but I don't see any nubs or any traces. No filled in areas. Seeing the side profiles, I can't see any. Again, though, we can't go on the opposite side. And the 4th gate, which is opposite the first one we looked at, there are no nubs. This is an interesting little area here. I'm not sure. I don't think that's a nub trace. It might just be grain in the rock or processing of the surface. But I don't see any filled in areas, nothing obvious, right? In that first example, very obvious. And while we're here, we're going to take a little trip down this avenue. You'll look over here to the left first. You'll see cutouts for clamps, keystone cuts to connect blocks, and then you'll also see these half rounded with a flat profile on the bottom or top impressions, and they're in several blocks. These look like some form of an inverted nub, I think, maybe for connecting the next course of masonry. Okay, so can you see the nub yet? Right there in front of us. The only one. That's very telling, I think. We don't see any nubs on any of the other surfaces. other walls. Nope. Only here. And again, it's this kind of undefined, rounded, crudely shaped profile. Also some interesting beveling on some of these foundation blocks, right? Around the corner, that's very sharp. Now we've backed up a little bit from where we were. We were over there. And you can see on these two columns what I believe are traces of nubs. You can see it's about the right shape and size for what those other nubs were. It's just a discolored patch, maybe. Maybe they've been filled in. Hard to tell. But it's very interesting. These look like they probably would have had nubs. There are other columns that have these, but not all of them, I will admit. But these look like they should have had nubs, or this is some kind of expression of the nub. And then from where we were and where we were previously, we're coming around, and I want to point out this gate here, missing lintel, but this gate is very interesting, and it has some very interesting connections attributed to it if we look closely. First, there's a couple of square holes. Interesting placement of square holes. Only this side, not the other. Wonder what those could have been for. They're very small. You can see the design is the Chicana or Andean cross, and I have some photos we can cut to look at that better. You see this Andean cross, it's almost the exact same expression, the Chicana, repeating as a pattern. And you'll also find, when we look at some other temples from above, that these are actually the top profiles of some of the temples. But what I think is really interesting is what happens when you go through the gate and you turn around. Down at the bottom there are two very large crude nubs. How about that? And I want to point out this design. Okay, let's look at this. This, you could say, is a capital I shape. I think that's how I'm going to refer to it. We're going to see more instances of this in other temples. And I want to give credit to the LAH.RU Russian researchers, because they made a great connection in their video on Warangal, which I'll give a link to in the description to that video, because that one is a must watch, because they have great footage of nubs that you can't get anywhere else, and some of them are in subterranean temples nearby, which is very interesting. And what the LAH crew noticed is that those motifs, those capital I shapes, are mirrored at Ollantaytambo in Peru, which there's also some other weird processing marks like scooping or inverted nubs. And here's a side profile of that same stone, and I couldn't find a really good front image of it, but LAH.RU, those guys have a really good angle of it, and they make the comparison. So again, highly recommend you guys watch their video. And then we'll go back through the gate, and we'll go over to a little porch, or portico, or whatever you want to call this, over here. And this is where I found one of the first sets of nubs, and if you'll watch Praveen Mohan's video, Praveen has a video on Warangal, I believe he points these out too. I'll give you the link for that video as well. Here is a very interesting expression. So on these two little benches, or whatever you want to call these uprights, you have a pair of nubs. On the other side, they are not there. So I'm not sure why you would have them on one side but not the other. And again, they're that same profile, kind of crude and undefined, and I believe the far one is a little bit smaller. And of course you have the very precise lingam and the square holes and indentations in the background. And here's a still from one of Praveen's videos. I believe it's the most recent one, and he's talking either about the lingam or the nubs, and it's a good angle to see there's none over here on the right side. And here we see another one of these little benches or seats from over there. We've just gone over here, and these do not have any nubs on either side, so that's curious. Their profiles are a little bit different too. This one's more slanted than this one, and you can see the squares. What's going on with these? Are these filled in? I'm not sure how to explain that. So now from over there in that region, we're jumping back over to here, and you can see what's left of this temple and how much it's being shored up with modern blocks. And there are some interesting objects along this avenue I want to look at. First is this object, very interesting, with the square hole, round holes, another small square hole, and this bevel that creates a trench and what looks to be a spout. I believe Praveen would probably say there was a lingam that was supposed to go here. Other interesting blocks with holes in them, perhaps clamps. And then down here, a very, very interesting object. How about this? A nubbed basin. Now this is some kind of basin that had something to do with pouring, I believe, because there's this little notch cut out here. So something poured into this, or this overflowed into something else. But there appears to be a couple of them. But this one is intact and has nubs on it, the same profile as the others. Another angle over here, that basin, and then a larger basin that does not appear to have any nubs on it, but perhaps a hole in it for pouring out of. Interesting. And then we're going to go down this avenue and we're going to look at some of the bits that seem to be stacked along the sides. And then we have a stone here with a row of square holes. That's interesting. And other column elements, pedestals and capitals. Other very nice ornate work. Capitals, I believe, and pedestals. More of that Chicana Andean cross motif. I believe that must be an elephant or a bull toppled over back there. Okay, and from over there we are coming over to here to look at these foundation stones. You can see the clamps, or the traces of the clamps that held the blocks together. Another interesting connection to lots of global ancient sites. Egypt, Peru, I think Pumapunku immediately when I see things like this, and temples in Egypt. And I want to note that there are two different colors of stone here, for the most part. You can see there's the darker colored stone, and then the lighter reddish colored stone. And it appears that there were temples like this one here, that's left of it, the foundations. This was a reddish stone temple all the way down to the foundations. And what's interesting about these foundations is they don't appear to have nubs. This looks like some kind of staining, perhaps. I'm not sure if you want to say that's a nub, but walking around, there are no nubs on this foundation, as far as I can tell. We can't really get around to the other sides, but I think there might be a correlation between the clamps and the red stone, maybe, and then the nubs and the darker stone, perhaps. An interesting wall over here that has some square cutouts and looks like square filler stones in it. That's unique. But then again, with this, is this a reddish? You could say this is a reddish stone. So maybe the nubs can be on both the red and the darker stones. And I believe I see a grain running through this. So like with the Serapeum boxes and the Bestet box coffer, it has a grain running through it. And I just spotted this, another potential nub trace. You can see the discoloration. I'm not quite sure what's going on there. You can get pretty close. But it's odd. It's just like where a nub should be, but it's a discolored area. But this is about as close as I can get on the far side of that red foundation, and I don't see any nubs or traces of nubs. So it is curious how they are sporadic or isolated to certain areas and stone types, at least for the most part. Interesting pedestal here that's red stone and the darker stone combined. Lots of interesting bits around that don't seem to have been cataloged or attempted to be put back together. Interesting here, these scoops, again, maybe like those Ollantaytambo stones. A lot of interesting parallels, I think. And maybe some more keystone cuts in the darker stones here, so who knows? Maybe nubs and keystones could be used on both stone types. And then we'll look at some of the photos I found. Now, some of these photos I couldn't really place exactly to the Warangal region proper. Some of these appear to be outlying areas of Warangal. It's a whole city, right? It's a whole fort. So might have to do a little more sleuthing to confirm these, but the architecture looks right. Now, one thing I wanted to point out is one of their defensive walls, some portions of it have bevel blocks that we've pointed out early on in my series that have a polygonal or cellular nature to them. Very interesting. There is variation in the surface treatments and textures. They're not all beveled the same way. It's very curious. Confirmation of clamps, and it does appear to be metal in there. Sure, that's steel. If it's rusting like that, it's not turning green. I want to say that's a steel or iron oxide. More of this wall and this very unique coping motif made out of L-shaped blocks and other stepped blocks, polygonal, and the course arrangement. Notice the variation. Long slabs and then rows of smaller square stones. And those seem to have more beveling on them. Down here, this beveling, this looks almost Middle Eastern, doesn't it? It looks like Baalbek or Jerusalem or those other sites. And you could even see a little bit of South American margins in some of these bevels. And, of course, the polygonal nature. These were an interesting spot. I'm not sure if these are at Warangal again, but the columns look right. And some of these other decorative motifs look right. But you can see on this object up here at the top, there are nubs. And again, this same repeating profile, rounded top, flat bottom, and they are shallow and off-center. They're not quite parallel or uniform. Another area of Warangal, I believe, this was Phil at Ancient Alternative Views spot. He said, look at the wall in the background, and sure enough, there are nubs on the back. One here and two over here, different locations. Maybe they were on one block and that block has cracked, not sure. But very interesting. They're sporadic, not uniform. And of course, the association with this shrine. And then one more really good view of this bench area again, just to confirm, nubs on the left, no nubs or even traces on the right. And then we are going to jump to Virupaksha temple. You can see there's a big spread. And some of these sites, I might not have the right pin, because when you type in these names, you sometimes get 2 or 3 locations near each other. So a lot of the temple names are similar, so it's hard to be 100% certain. But from the photos I've found of this temple, there are no good street view angles in photos or footage. But from what I've found from pictures, it looks like we're going to be looking at this exterior wall and this front entryway here. Okay, so here are some photos. I tried to find the best ones. There really aren't that many for this site. It was actually in a blog, and the blogger mentioned that this site is really underdocumented. So you have to look past the paint. The paint, obviously, much later than the construction of the temple. You can see very faintly nubs underneath the paint. Here's a large one and a smaller pair over there. We will look at more angles. And then, again, look at this motif, this capital I shape, or whatever you want to call that. Hallmark, again, repeating from Warangal, which was pretty far away. One of the other side gates that was not painted, and you can see on either side nubs. You'll see these small ones here, and these over here. Different profiles, but they all seem fairly shallow. Now, it appears to be rebuilt, right? You see a very big difference between the large lower blocks, and then all these interior blocks are smaller and much more mortar. Some of these look to have been dislodged, but then built on top of, right? So you have to say that the foundations and the gateway, more than likely original, they've just been restored. And the same style of wall you can see as before by Warangal, these long slabs with some of them small bevels and smaller square stones included. And interesting cutouts. This, I don't think this went here, right? This was one of the side flanking pillars that has the same capital I shape. The other side obviously doesn't have that. I believe they just put this there as something to shore up the rest of the wall, but I think we know this does not go there. A front view of that wall we were looking at earlier, that gateway. Now, what I do want to point out are these filled in areas on the motifs, and then how this one over here doesn't appear to have been fully created. This is very curious to me. I've stared at this for a while trying to understand this, Now maybe these are filled in and this is all patched up, but why is there only partial expressions on some of these blocks versus the fully formed expression on the others? Happens on both sides, you can see. Very curious. But even over here, look at this block right here. That is a textbook example of a bevel block. That is a Middle Eastern expression. You could put that block right at Baalbek and it would not look out of place. Now look at the nub expressions again. Single versus pairs. And the concentration down here along the foundations, like we saw in the temples in the foundations video previously. And then a final look here at this interior temple. Now you can see the columns fully expressed from the more simplistic expression on the exterior with all the adornments. And you'll look over here on the right. Aha, one block with a pair of nubs offset again, but similar sizes and shapes. You'll see the course arrangement is like the perimeter walls. It's somewhat polygonal, even though they are mostly geometric shapes. The course arrangement varies a lot. You'll see small filler stones, and if you watch Praveen's most recent video, he talks about the phenomenon of small filler stones, and this phenomena seems to be global. We see it even on Easter Island, like I mentioned before. That one Ahu, that megalithic Ahu, has a small filler stone at the corner of 4 blocks, set very precise, just like the Kori Concha inside has a small filler stone, tiny, inset in the corner, almost as a signature or some kind of identifying marker, I think. And then lastly today we're going to go over to Trikutam temple, and we're going to go to Twitter to get some footage and the original poster here of these photos. Now the best footage you're going to get of this site is from Vlad9VT. Vlad9VT is the only person to make a video specifically about this temple, so I'm going to provide that link in the description as well. There are really no good pictures available on my end. I've looked, I can't find that many, especially no detailed images, but even from these you can see there's nubs on the exterior of this temple. And I tried to search on Google Earth for this and I couldn't find it, but they say it's near Warangal, so from the capital design, I believe that's about correct. You can see the capitals have that same shape to them. Sorry for the poor quality, this is all we have. But even in some of these photos, you can see nubs in the background wall. Now, I guess this is a retaining wall. These nubs look like inclusions again, almost different types of stone. It's very curious, they're darker than the surrounding stones. The photos I found, just like we saw before, another angle, these darker nubs, they seem to be the same kind of profile as the Warangal nubs, but darker material or darker coloration to them, almost as though they're inclusions of different materials or different mineralogy. Very curious stuff. And then lastly here today, just a poor quality screenshot from Vlad's video. He calls them knobs. You can see where he's highlighted them, so you can see the variation in placement, how it's not uniform again, looks to be clusters and patterns. Even in this poor quality, I think I can see the rounded top, flat bottom profile again on some of these. But definitely recommend you guys go watch his video because he has much better quality footage of all this. So I will provide links in the description for Praveen's video, for Vlad's video, and for the lah.ru video on Warangal and the subterranean temple that they found there, or they at least documented there. So I believe that underground temple, that subterranean temple, from what Shermanator Osborne, shout out Sherman, he sent me a video link, and I'll see if I can find that for you guys as well. It shows the news report of them uncovering this temple, I believe, so it might be a recent opening. I think Sherman said maybe 3 years ago, perhaps, so that's very interesting. So I'll have to look more into that, but in LAH's video, you can definitely see nubs on the interior walls and corners of some of these passageways and openings into this subterranean temple. So I'll try to provide all these links for you guys down in the description. We will try to do about 3 or 4 temples an episode so I can keep them short and digestible for you guys, and manageable so we can get through these in a reasonable amount of time. But I think there is definitely something going on in India that needs to be at least documented like we're doing now. Before we even begin to explain what we're seeing, we need to document all of this. And there are too many examples around the world to just shrug this off as a coincidence. There's just too many different regions of the world that have the same phenomena. So we're going to keep looking into this deeper. I hope you guys appreciated this. Thanks for hanging out with me, and we will talk to you next time.